Hey everyone, this is Holy City Center Radio. It is episode 408. Thank you so much for listening. Today is Friday, September 12th, 2025. So, it's been a few days. uh, and not just the shooting, the assassination of Charlie Kirk, the conservative pundit. He did a lot of other things, founder of Turning Point USA, and so on and so forth. Also, we have the 24th anniversary of September 11th on Thursday, which was just the day after. In addition to the Kirk incident, there was a school shooting in the Denver area. It may have even been Denver itself. Forgive me for not having the details in front of me. Where I think the total is 3 students that were injured. Thankfully, not dead, but still tragic, scary, and something that's going to have a lot of trauma for anyone involved. So, because what happened with Kirk surprised me a little bit about how I was feeling about it, and I'll get into that in a minute. So long story short, I don't have anything really planned for this episode. I know it's probably shocking to you, like, what, you plan stuff? But so there's not going to be any Charleston specific necessarily stories or news. I'm going to mention Nancy Mace and her predictable response to everything. But this is not going to be like a normal episode. And I totally understand if you don't want to hear any discussions about what's occurred over the last few days and the bigger picture. And, I'm kind of just talking and working through my own feelings. And so I totally understand if you don't want to listen to this episode. Feel free to skip it. No harm, no foul. And you can come back when hopefully, I'll be back to talking mostly about Charleston news. That's also the reason why I didn't really feel like having any music or, the normal intro and stuff. I'm just not feeling it. In addition to that, I made a decision prior to what occurred with Charlie Kirk. So this is not related to it, although it kind of reinforced what I was thinking. And that is, I'm going to take a little bit of a break from the podcast in October. So still going to have many episodes left here this month of September. Still plan on keeping you up to date as much as I can up until October, where I'll take a break. I'm hoping and thinking it'll only just be the month of October, but we'll see, I'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically, so I started this podcast. I had to remind myself, I didn't think it had been this long, but back in 2021. So it's been 4 years of doing this podcast. We're approaching 5 years. And at first it was a monthly podcast, or a weekly, once a week. And then I thought, maybe we could do this a few times a week, and ended up doing 3 episodes a week, smaller episodes. Not everyone had an interview, whereas most of the weekly ones did. So that's a lot of episodes. As I said, there's been 408 episodes, and the majority of them have been this last, couple of years when I started doing the, 3 times a week deal. And I didn't always hit that 3 times a week mark for varying reasons. I'm busy doing the rest of the Holy City Center stuff, as well as the newspaper I work with as well. So newspapers, I should say. And it just felt like there were times where I just wasn't super pumped to do the show. And I love doing the show. And part of that was I've been doing it so much. Part of that has just been the news. And just like I'm tired of, seeing the same things over and over again, and things that, we talk about are done, come back around, like, we won that fight, and, a political fight, say, over a bad bill or something, but then the bill gets reintroduced. And the temperature is not turned down since the election. It's been turned up. And I think President Trump, when he did this speech to the nation, which, by the way, he did not do, when a Minnesota politician was assassinated alongside her, I think it was her husband and dog. And then another politician was injured in the shooting by that same person. He didn't do a national address after that. And in fact, he made comments about how, why would he call Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota? It would be a waste of time, or something along those lines. So, but no, we're going to go on TV because this is, quote, one of ours, and he made a bunch of remarks about, radical leftists or whatever. and, referencing that they're going to go after not just the person who committed this shooting, if it is just one person, which it seems to be, but anyone who may have like helped radicalize this person. He mentioned like groups associated. So basically saying anything left wing, that may have said something negative about conservatives or Kirk or whatever. That's not turning the temperature down at all. And unfortunately, it's not just related to that. I've been feeling that way for a while. Being on Twitter is not fun anymore. I used to really enjoy posting on Twitter, talking to people. And it's no social media is really a super fun place to be, especially these last few days, but in general. And although that's not going to change, I'm still going to post on social media. I think just the collectiveness of all of it, it's just like, oh man. And there's so many episodes where I say, I hope next time I've got some more fun things to talk about, but it always just felt like there was these important things going on, and they certainly are. So in any event, a lot of that was kind of weighing on me prior to all this. And then this last couple of days just kind of reinforced it. And so it's going to take a little break. Hopefully it's just October. We'll see how I feel about everything going on in Holy City Centerland and all that. The priority is always the website and, the things associated with it. And, but I do love doing this podcast, and I appreciate all your support. And I hope to be back, like I said, November, but I'll keep you posted. So anyway, that was the one thing I wanted to talk about today. But then, yes, it's a very sad, tragic, and horrific incident that happened on Wednesday in Utah. As I'm sure you're all well aware, Charlie Kirk was shot and killed what appears to be a lone gunman. As of my recording this on Thursday afternoon, that gunman is still out there somewhere, has not been captured, has not been found. A couple people were brought in as suspects on Wednesday, and turned out that they were released. They were not the gunman. So yes, very much as of this recording, still out there somewhere. And the FBI, just a couple hours before recording this, released a picture of the person. So that's where we're at right now as I'm recording. And I saw a video from pretty far away. It was like one of the first videos that came out. And, because of the way social media is, it was readily available. And if you are one of those folks who doesn't have like a program like I do, like TweetDeck, which makes sure that I can still look at Twitter chronologically. So the most popular tweets aren't popping up. I'm seeing like what people are posting in real time, which I always preferred. But if you're using your app or twitter.com or whatever, you're seeing like the most popular, the most engaged things, which are usually things that are meant to enrage you. And so, of course, this video is up everywhere. Video is bad. It's scary. It's shocking to see. But I was not prepared for, a little while later when multiple videos that were far closer and that you could see the shooting in graphic detail in terms of what happened after he was shot. I was not prepared to see that. And I've not been able to shake that image, the video that I saw from my mind. It's tough to see. And I've seen people say things like, yeah, if that's tough for you to see, this is happening to children in schools. And that's true. These types of weapons, rifles, assault rifles, whatever the term you want to use, that horrific video, I didn't need to see it to know what horrible things were happening to children and anyone who's involved in any sort of mass shooting, the types of injuries that they get and how graphic it is. And so that point was out there and I do think that's true. I think some people, not that I think everyone needs to see these violent acts, like no one should have to see that, but it really does make you be like, oh yeah, we think about these things in this abstract way, but actually seeing it is a whole different feeling. And you just realize the brutality and the horror of what occurs in those moments. And so that shook me, obviously. And the fact that it happened shook me, even though, we've talked about things on this podcast sometimes about how multiple things can be true. And this is a sad, horrific, horrible thing that happened. And Charlie Kirk did not deserve to die, period. I can still think he was a terrible person. Now, I'm sure he was a great father, a great husband, I mean, friend, whatever. I'm sure. I'm sure even people who disagree with him politically liked him as a person and just vehemently disagreed with him. He has said some horrible things over the years. Of course, one of the ones that everyone is seeing is the fact that he made some quote about, it was like, I think it was 2023, about how, it's not good that people die, but it's a necessary. This isn't verbatim. I'm paraphrasing, but something along the lines of, hey, in order to have the Second Amendment and us to have that right, unfortunately, that means, people might die because there's going to be some wacko out there that's not, that goes and kills someone. And so a lot of people are posting that as kind of like a gotcha, or like, hey, I didn't want him to be, I don't think our country should be this way, but he thought the country should be this way. And I certainly get the irony in that quote and how he said that, and that's how he dies. But putting that aside, he has made a lot of horrible remarks, including when this whole DEI culture war was going on, about how if he goes on a plane and he sees that the pilot is black, he's going to worry that, is this person qualified? I mean, and he said stuff like that multiple times. Of course, he said a bunch of horrible things about trans people, about women. And so I'm not sad that someone pushing that ideology can no longer push that ideology. And I think those, some of the things he said are abhorrent, but he didn't deserve to die because he said those things. And it shouldn't be celebrated. Besides the fact it shouldn't be celebrated anyway, I don't think a lot of people realize that just because he's gone doesn't mean his ideas and the people he radicalized, to be kind of far right MAGA lovers, and there's a lot. Young people, whether they agreed with him or not, are very well aware of who Charlie Kirk is, because in social media, I already alluded to with the fact that there's graphic videos so easy to be seen by me, an adult, and that means that anybody on that site can see it. That means children if they're on there. So there's that side of it. The horrible opinions that you see from people and violent rhetoric you see from people hiding behind keyboards, or sometimes rhetoric from people who aren't hiding. They are politicians. So social media is certainly part of the problem here, but and a lot of these conservative commentators, Ben Shapiro's another one, they know how to take advantage of algorithms. And again, algorithms are meant to send you into a rage a lot of the times, because those types of posts, when people are angry, get the most interactions. So you might get served videos by them, or you get served a video by, like a stitch, which is when someone gives their opinion or take on a clip of someone else. So you're seeing this guy all the time. And if you're young, you're definitely seeing him a lot. And his influence cannot be understated. How many young people, especially, because you go to college campuses, he would do these debates. And again, these clips get out there, and people who are not consuming news from multiple outlets or consuming news outside of things like TikTok, he sounds like a perfectly reasonable person sometimes with his arguments. If you don't know the full scope, or if you don't look into some things. And so that's not going to change. And look at how many people were there at that event. I'm sure some were just there to watch, some were protesting, or at least, they might have just been there to watch it. They weren't like actively protesting, but they didn't necessarily go there because they believed in him. Some went there to debate him because they don't believe a lot of the stuff he says. But that crowd is huge, and he's doing that all over the country at multiple campuses, multiple types of events. These people aren't just going to stop believing the stuff he said because he's gone. And so people who think that somehow this is a good thing for any reason are wrong, again, just on the moral value. Someone dying is not a good thing. And yes, I get it, a dictator or something, short, but his ideas aren't going anywhere. And you may have whoever the shooter is, just made him a martyr, just made people probably believe more in what he was saying, and more, they're now activated to really push forward for these beliefs because he was killed for what he believes in. At least that's the thought process. We literally have no idea. I don't think that's a huge leap to say that is likely what happened. whatever this shooter turns out to be as far as political beliefs, if any, and what their main reason, if there's not more than one for committing this act, it doesn't matter really. But whatever they were trying to silence, it's going to backfire. And this only makes things worse. Political violence always makes things worse. This is not the way to do things. And and we're already seeing online, and again, I know online's not real life, but there are people behind some of these accounts that aren't like Russian bots and stuff that are already blaming the left, despite the fact we don't know who this person is. And he very well could turn out to be the most lefty liberal that's ever existed. And again, does it really matter? Not really. To them, it does. Because then they'll say this is left-wing violence. They're going to group it in with the assassination attempt on Donald Trump and all these other things. Of course, negating or ignoring the fact that the person who shot Trump clearly didn't have any set political beliefs. Like, they supported some Dems, they supported some Republicans. If I remember correctly, he supported Trump, but then that support stopped at some point. He came from a family of conservatives, but they. You know how online is. People don't believe it. There's conspiracy theories and all that. Just like the assassination in Minnesota, where people were like, oh, he was on some board. Governor Tim Walz, a Democrat. This guy was on that board. He was appointed by Tim Walz. This is Tim Walz guy. He's a Democrat. He wasn't at all. There's absolutely nothing in this guy's past, especially recent past, that showed that he was left-leaning, that he was a Democrat. Everything is the exact opposite. And again, does it matter? Not really, but the truth matters. That's what matters. And so there's always going to be that segment of the population that's only believing the propaganda that they've seen, again, through things like social media. And sometimes you're like, there's some people, it's like hard to fault them for that, for thinking that, no, the left, it's all about left violence. It's all trans people committing violence, because that's all they're being served. And there's no fact checking. There's no, looking at other sources. I was just talking to a friend today about this whole incident, and she mentioned talking to a parent of hers who is, conservative, not super MAGA, but supports President Trump. And she watches Fox News all day, but she's not like a diehard, just sitting there in front of the TV all day. It's one of those things where it's like on in the background when she's home or whatever. And so she's picking up bits and pieces of information, but she's not really looking for news elsewhere. And not because she wants to remain ignorant. I mean, not everyone has the bandwidth to watch and consume all this news and try to get to the bottom of what's true and what's not, when there's just so much out there. And you're seeing posts from friends that maybe you trust and believe in. So you're like, well, they wouldn't post something fake. This must be real. Whatever it is. Or you just believe something because it confirms some bias you have. But she had a conversation where she kind of like broke down some things with her. And I won't go into a ton of details, but when she kind of presented her mom with nothing even crazy, they weren't arguing, they weren't fighting, no name calling or anything. It was very civil, she said, but it was just like, Mom, do you really believe that trans people are disproportionately committing more violent acts than any other segment of the population? And mentioned to her mom that she had worked with a bunch of trans people in whatever industry she was in and liked all those people, and said, do you see those people being more violent than anyone else, or being violent, period? These were your friends. And it really opened her mom's eyes up a little bit. And also, her mom had no idea about the assassination of the state senator in Minnesota. No clue. Because it was barely talked about on Fox News, or not talked about at all. Or maybe she just didn't catch it because it wasn't something they were replaying over and over again. And that shows you the dangerous sides to media and consuming only one type of media. And don't get me wrong, I consume some very far left stuff. And I roll my eyes at some of the stuff that some of these people say sometimes. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Like, there's just as wacko people on the far left as well. But I consume that media because I do agree with a lot of the things that they say. But there are times where I'm just like, okay, this is going a little bit too far. And I don't mean violent rhetoric, but, I'm like, okay, everything Trump does doesn't mean he needs to be impeached immediately, that kind of thing. And if I only consume that, there'd be situations where I'd be shocked probably to hear certain details about incidents and things. So that gave me a little bit of hope, but also I know that there's a lot of people who have dug in their heels and they're saying things on social media like not just blaming the left or trans people, even though there's no indication that this person is trans at all, but they're just trying to group them in. They're also saying like, and some pretty prominent, conservative pundits or whatever you want to call them, like Laura Loomer and Andrew Tate and all these people talking about this is war and we can't stand by anymore and making these violent overtures towards quote unquote the left. Well, who's the left? Is it just anybody who votes Democrat? Is it anybody who supports any sort of left leaning or liberal policy? What does that mean? And when they don't, and not that it's right to call out a politician and threaten their lives, but when you leave it so vague and open like that, you get these yahoos, and the same goes for any left-leaning commentator, pundit who does something similar. These people believe everyone who is on this side or that side is evil, and the only hope is to kill them. So it's very sad, and it's been very scary seeing some of the stuff people have been posting online, and also with everything else going on in the country with National Guard being deployed, to American cities, and talk about banning trans people from owning weapons. What is this? I'm not a big slippery slope guy where I'm just like every little decision a politician makes or whatever, well, it's just going to turn into the worst thing. But when they're signaling that they're going to go further, I think it's okay to be like, hey, this seems like this is a very slippery slope where we're going to test this out in LA and then let's see what happens. And now we can push this. And again, Trump was doing it. Nancy Mace went online and was not online. I'm sorry. She went outside to a gaggle of reporters and like immediately, this is yesterday too, literally no details about the shooter. I mean, technically we still don't. And she says, this is all like the left's fault. I'm sick of all this. This is on the left. This is on them. And then when the reporter was like, well, by that logic, does that mean the assassination in Minnesota is on the right? And she just like yelled and, drowned out the reporter. And basically, we're just talking about today, which is telling because it's all political and theater for her. In addition to that, she's online today tweeting at like the Greenville County schools because apparently, possibly, I have no clue if it's true, but apparently a teacher at one of their schools posted something insensitive about Charlie Kirk's death. Somehow the post they put on their Facebook became public. Someone screenshot it, shared it, found out he apparently works at a Greenville school. And so she's tweeting at the school this post from this guy who's got his name on it and his picture. Now, putting aside the fact we have no idea if this is true, we have no idea if the picture is the guy, if it's just a guy with a similar name. But even if it is that guy, you're putting him in danger. In the way you're shrieking and yelling about Charlie Kirk was put in danger by anyone who may have possibly said anything insensitive about him at any point in time prior to the shooting. But now you're doing the same thing to this guy, demonizing him. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying what he said was right because it isn't, but you're putting him in danger. But I know that's not going to her and her minions and people like libs of TikTok who also jumped on the bandwagon once Nancy tagged them. They don't care about that person. So you have to try to appeal to something else. Like you're putting everyone in that school, including children, in danger. We've seen this before. When libs of TikTok and Nancy Mace go after a school, or in Nancy's case, MUSC, that can lead to things like threats, bomb threats, etc. Now, yeah, we've been lucky where a lot of the times these threats didn't materialize in anything. And it was probably just some jerk trying to like disrupt schools or hospitals or whatever, these folks are going after. But we've also seen real world violence happen against perceived enemies and people doing bad things. She's putting people in danger by doing that. Just if this person did it, contact the school directly, work with them behind the scenes. You don't need to be tweeting about it. And then if the dude's fired and it's public knowledge or whatever, fine, share this story, talk about how horrible he is and he's the worst and the tolerant left and blah, 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 blah. But just tweeting it saying I've already contacted the school about this, but still using the picture and tagging the schools, like you're putting all of them in danger. Or, best case, if something happens, say someone calls in a bomb threat that's not real, you're disrupting a school day. You're making police and firefighters and whoever else have to go to the scene, waste time, waste resources. It's just the hypocrisy of all of it. Of course, people posting online these loving tributes about Charlie Kirk, which whatever, that's fine if that's what you believe, but don't say a peep about the Minnesota lawmaker that's killed. Don't say anything when another mass shooting at a school has happened. And by the way, anyone watching the news yesterday, the news of the shooting of Charlie Kirk is interrupted by breaking news of a shooting at a school. How American is that? And I hear a lot of people posting, this isn't America. This isn't who we are. It is. This is who we are. It might not be who you as an individual are, or who I am as an individual, but this is our country. Political violence is not new. It's not even like, oh, well, yeah, it's, the last 2 years of there are times where things pick up, but this isn't new. Our country has a very violent history, not just politically. Whether taking land from people who were here first, going to war over whatever. And I'm not saying wars aren't justified sometimes. You know what I'm trying to say, though? Like the violence and political violence are very much us and part of our history. Alexander Hamilton, wasn't he shot by the vice president? I mean, they used to have duels. And I know that's a long, long time ago. But my point is, it continues. JFK, RFK, assassinated. Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated. Ronald Reagan attempted assassination. I think Gerald Ford also had an attempted assassination. I believe it was Ford as well. Obviously, the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. We've had, bombs and things delivered to politicians across the aisle. We've had, back with the anthrax scare, people being sent either fake anthrax, and I think there were some actual incidents of real anthrax being sent. Do you remember that kind of scare post 9/11? That guy who was driving in a van, huge MAGA supporter, and all these like Pelosi and Barack Obama stuff all spray painted in his van, and he had a bunch of weapons. January 6th, pretty big day of political violence. And if you're one of those people, and I'm sure if you're listening, you're not, but if you're one of those people who think this was all some FBI thing and all those people were not MAGA, they were all Democrats. Okay, fine. Well, whoever you think those people are, that's political violence regardless. And that's to say nothing of the day-to-day threats that people, especially politicians and commentators in the political realm, athletes, get on a day-to-day basis. Celebrities. Hell, I have gotten death threats. And I've gotten a death threat this year. And I'm nobody. So I sympathize with people, even Nancy Mace. Like, she should not be receiving death threats and violent threats, or if the thing about her, the spray paint and the keying of her car and all the other things, if all those really were someone else, she doesn't deserve that. Nobody does. And it is scary to get an email or a DM or something that alludes to violence against you, even if it's vague. I never truly thought I was in any danger by any stretch, but you never know. People are crazy. Sometimes that crazy just manifests with them saying things online that they don't really mean and don't actually intend to go do. They're just angry and they just want to say the worst, meanest thing ever. But you never know. Sometimes people who post that kind of stuff go and then do something. And this is who we are. And it's sad, but it's true. And in the wake of something like this happening, I understand people being angry, especially if, Charlie Kirk's like your guy or whatever. But responding to that when we don't even know what happened truly yet, that this one person, you're going to use this to say the left is so violent, and same is true if after Minnesota, if people who are Democrat or left-leaning liberal went out and said, we got to round up all the people on the right, they're so violent, you can't blame one person, or you can't blame an entire group of people on one person's action. Now, certainly you can talk about, like, how did this person get there? Were they radicalized somehow by rhetoric that politicians have said or things they saw online? So, inevitably there might be people who influenced them, but ultimately it comes down to the person deciding to pull the trigger or whatever violent act they choose. And we have a lot to look at. But if the response that I've seen is, from some people is, extrapolates across the country from what I've seen online, it's scary. And things aren't going to get better. Unless not just the politicians, which a lot of them have been blaming the media for Charlie Kirk's death, blaming trans people, less so this time around, especially since the photo is now out. It does not appear, which who knows, could be, but does not seem to be a trans person. But there's already talk that there was some sort of cultural ideologies or things written on the gun that was found and bullets, and people are already speculating, oh, it's trans ideology, whatever that even means. And they're trying to, put blame on a bigger group for one person's actions. And it is who we are. And, it's been a tough couple days. Like I said, obviously not a fan of Charlie Kirk and the things he said, but he did not deserve to die, especially in that way, especially this young. And it's really awful, what his family, friends will have to go through. It doesn't excuse his rhetoric and some of the stuff he's done in the past, but he didn't deserve that. Nobody does. And I fear it's just going to continue because, again, we've seen this over and over again through the years. It's just that the uptick of general violence, gun violence specifically in this country, and specifically mass shootings in this country, continue to go up with very little variation from year to year. We don't have like a big drop one year, really. And so there's that side of it as well, the guns. And what are we willing to allow as a country while still maintaining a part of our Constitution? There's a lot of things to be talking about right now. And a lot of things that we should have been talking about prior to this. But for whatever reason, probably because he was such a polarizing figure, like so beloved by many on the right and so reviled on the left, and that he died in such a violent and public way at such a young age, I think it struck a nerve with a lot of people where, unfortunately, school shootings just sometimes don't. Because you're like, oh God, a school shooting in Denver? Oh, 3 injured? That's it? Okay, all right, cool. Because we're just so used to it being so much worse than that. We've been shocked so many times that at times when it's quote unquote smaller than it currently is, oh, just 3 injured? Okay, we immediately forgetting that these are 3 children who, whatever their injuries are, whether minor or a little bit more major, but they're going to live, which is great that they're going to live. We don't think about the trauma, what long-term effects they may have mentally as well as physically, depending on the injuries, their families, their friends, any of the kids and teachers and staff in that school. We forget about the humanness of all of it because it happens so often that we become desensitized to it. And if there's not a way to politicize the violence, it doesn't necessarily stay in the headlines. I don't think there's a problem with people, including myself, people on TV, giving opinions, calling out politicians or commentators or whoever when they say something wrong or they lie. That's okay. That should be allowed. It's when that rhetoric ramps up and there's violent undertones or outright, threats of violence. That's when it crosses the line. And you don't always know who's hearing your words. Now, again, not so much for people like me on this very, 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 very small scale, but more people in the national level. Or if you're a politician, that has some clout in your state or a local, whatever, celebrity, reporter, blogger, if you have like a pretty big following and you're spouting stuff about the left or the right. And again, not just general complaints or criticisms, but violent or dehumanizing language, against a political rival, a group of people, whether that's the left, the right, black, white, trans, gay, whoever, any group that you try to dehumanize, it's just going to continue these acts of violence. And no, stop people not talking about violent rhetoric and things. That's not going to solve it either. But there's always going to be violence in every country. Unfortunately, humans can be violent, as we've seen throughout our history. And that horrible stabbing in Charlotte that people were trying to politicize as well. I think it was the day before, or maybe the video had come out the day before, but the incident actually happened. I don't remember if it was like a month prior or a few weeks prior, but once the video came out, it was shocking people to see how random and violent that act truly is. Again, should already know that by reading someone stabbed, but sometimes seeing it really brings it into focus for people. Anyway, like I said, I had anything written out. This was just me just kind of working through it, thinking about stuff. And if you stuck through to this point, I appreciate it. I hope, even if maybe you didn't agree with everything I said or you have a different take, I hope you got something out of this, whatever it is. I there's podcasts I listen to, and I like to just sometimes hear someone else talk about something that I've been thinking about, something big that's going on in the world, just to know that other people are thinking about these things and how it's a complicated thing when someone that you just vehemently disagree with and think had some really abhorrent positions and said some horrible things over the year. It's it's weird to almost mourn the situation in that person because they don't deserve this. This is the extreme, but it's still a weird, yeah, but they said, well, they don't deserve all this stuff, but how much bandwidth do we give, to this horrible incident outside of the bigger picture? And yeah, I think there's others that are, because also people online, some are celebrating the death. Some are throwing those quotes of what he said out there as a ha ha ha, he deserved this kind of thing. And some are people that I respect and agree with politically a lot of the times, but that's been a little tough for me to see. Again, I'm not saying you need to mourn him. I'm not saying you really need to take a big chunk of your day thinking about him personally, but the bigger picture, the spot that we're in right now in history, that we're living through, the violence that preceded all this and the rhetoric that preceded all this, and the stuff that unfortunately will probably follow this. It's been a lot to think about. It's been a weird couple days, and maybe it has been for you too, and hopefully, again, you got something out of this. Anyway, I hope you have a good weekend. I hope things get better somehow, some way, with the rhetoric in this country. It starts with us, of course, and calling out those who are not working to tone down some of the things they're saying. Nancy Mace, for instance, here locally, needs to tone down some things. But yeah, thanks for listening. I hope you have a good weekend. I'll be back with you next week, hoping I'll have a little bit of a clear mind, and we'll be able to get back to talking about Charleston specific news and things going on. And I appreciate you all indulging me and letting me use this as like a therapy session. And I'll talk to you next week. Until then, good night and good luck.